Stop what you were doing. This just took a hard turn. TSMC just hit the brakes on a 35B semiconductor project in Arizona, and the state's leadership is exploding. Not behind closed doors, publicly, loudly. And if you think this is just one company changing plans, you are missing the real danger. Because when a 35B chip build freezes, it is not a business hiccup. It is a stress fracture in the system. Here is the part nobody wants to say out loud. Arizona was sold a future, a new Silicon Desert, high-wage jobs, supply chain dominance. Now that future is wobbling in real time. And the governor's eruption is not about pride. It is about panic. Because when a project this large stalls, the fallout does not stay inside a boardroom, it spreads. Think about what 35B means. That is cranes, concrete, electrical buildouts, water planning, housing demand, tax forecasting. That is thousands of workers, contractors, and vendors making decisions based on a promise. And now, the signal coming out of TSMC is not so fast. Pause here. TSMC is not some random startup. This is the most strategically important chip manufacturer on the planet. When they hesitate, it is never casual. It is usually because the math stopped working, the risk jumped, or the politics shifted, sometimes all three. And this is where things turn. Because the moment the state hears halt, it is not just a delay, it is a credibility crisis. It is a warning flare that other companies can see from miles away. So why would the governor erupt? Because governors don't gamble their reputations on 35B projects unless they need them. Jobs, economic momentum, federal leverage, and a narrative that says, we are winning. But now the narrative is cracking. Let that sink in. If you're Arizona, you didn't just pitch land and permits, you pitched stability. You pitched that the US can build the most advanced chips on Earth without drama, without chaos, without constant cost blowouts. A halt says the opposite. It says the build is heavier than promised. It says the timeline is slipping. It says the risk is rising. And then something else breaks. Because a TSMC slowdown is not isolated. It lands inside a much bigger pressure chamber. The US is trying to reshore semiconductor capacity while also dealing with inflationary construction costs, labor shortages, permitting fights, water constraints, and geopolitical anxiety. That is not a normal business environment. That is a squeeze. Now consider the implications. If TSMC, of all companies, struggles to make the Arizona numbers work, what does that say about every other historic manufacturing comeback project being announced? Read that again. If the best chip builder on Earth pauses, what happens to everyone else? And the governor knows that. This is why the reaction is so emotional, because it's not just a spreadsheet problem. It's a momentum problem. Momentum is fragile, and once it snaps, it is hard to restart. Here is the uncomfortable reality. A 35B factory is not just a factory, it is an ecosystem. Suppliers expand. Local governments plan roads. Schools prepare for population growth. Real estate markets price in future salaries. Entire communities get pulled forward by the gravity of that build. So when the build halts, even temporarily, it triggers a chain reaction. Projects get postponed, hiring gets cautious, investors get cold, and every person counting on that wave starts asking the same question. Was it ever real? But here is where it gets worse, because semiconductor projects don't pause like a normal construction site. Every month of delay can mean cost spikes, contract renegotiations, and shifting tech targets. The chip world does not wait. Product cycles move, competitors move, geopolitics moves. So a delay is not neutral. A delay is damage. Now let's talk about why Arizona is the epicenter of this tension. The state has been positioned as the crown jewel of America's chip comeback, a symbol, a headline, proof that the US can pull critical manufacturing back home. But symbols are dangerous, because when a symbol fails, the psychological fallout is bigger than the financial fallout. And this is where the governor's eruption becomes a signal to everyone. It's a message that says, you don't get to walk away from this quietly. it's also a message that reveals fear. Fear of being left holding the bag, fear of being the politician who promised a miracle and delivered a crater. Think about what happens if TSMC slows hiring. That hits consumer spending, then local businesses, then tax revenue, then public budgets. It ripples. And if the state gave incentives, land deals, or infrastructure commitments, the pressure doubles. Because now voters start asking a brutal question: what did we give up and for what? Now the situation becomes more dangerous because this isn't only about Arizona. It's about the US trying to reduce dependence on overseas chip supply while tensions with China remain high. Chips are not tech, chips are power. Military systems, AI, cars, hospitals, everything. So when a domestic chip mega project freezes, it triggers a national security conversation whether anyone wants it or not. And then the political machine kicks in. Blame starts flying. Was it regulation, labor, costs, permits, union issues, corporate leverage, federal delays, state mismanagement? Here is the part nobody expects. Sometimes these halts aren't just about construction. Sometimes they're negotiating weapons. A company pauses to extract more concessions, faster approvals, bigger subsidies, more favorable terms. And if that's what's happening, the governor's eruption makes even more sense. Because if a state leader looks weak in that moment, the next demand gets bigger, and the next one, and the next one. That is how a project turns into a hostage situation. Pause here and consider the human layer. Workers relocate, families sign leases, people change their lives based on these announcements. So when leadership starts shouting and corporations start freezing, it creates a specific kind of instability, the kind that makes people lose trust. And once trust goes, everything becomes harder, hiring becomes harder, local support becomes harder, future investment becomes harder. Now, does a halt mean the project is dead? Not necessarily. But that's not the point. The point is what the halt reveals. It reveals friction. It reveals that the easy win story was never easy. It reveals that rebuilding advanced manufacturing in the US is a brutal, expensive, high stakes grind. And this is where the pressure compounds because the US is not just trying to build chips, it is trying to build them fast before the next disruption, before the next conflict, before the next supply chain shock. A delay is time, and time is the one thing you don't get back. So what happens next? Watch for three moves. First, more political heat. Expect statements, hearings, and public pressure to force clarity. Second, renegotiation. Behind the scenes, the price tag for getting it back on track often rises. Third, a narrative war. One side will say this is a temporary adjustment. The other side will say it's proof the strategy is failing. And the truth is, the market will decide who's right. Not speeches, not press conferences, the market. But here is the real problem. Even a temporary halt plants a seed of doubt, and doubt spreads. Other companies see it and start quietly reassessing their own timelines. Suppliers get cautious. Financiers demand higher returns. The entire ecosystem tightens. That is the spiral. A single stall becomes a broader freeze. So when you see the governor erupt, don't treat it like political theater. Treat it like an alarm bell. Because leaders don't explode when everything is fine. They explode when they feel control slipping. Let that sink in. A 35-bead bet just got shaky. In the industry that powers everything, at the moment, the country can least afford delays. And now the question isn't just what TSMC will do. It's what this moment exposes about the fragility of the entire reshoring push. Because if this build can be stopped, any build can be stopped.